Hey there, good people. Hope all is well with you today. And we are having a burning bridges conversation part two. Because when I tell you the rip from the headlines moments have been like just bubbling over in the last couple of weeks. Oh my gosh, there's just too many. And that's not the focus of this channel, but we're going to have some more of those because it has been nuts. And so here's the thing. Recently, I did a rip from the headlines, and it was focused on relationships and talking about being careful about how you burn your bridges. And the basis of it was from one of my favorite cooking shows and watching one of the chefs who was getting cut and his response and how he handled it. And I was like, you might want to be mindful of that because, you're going to have to work with these people and all the people out there who are watching your behavior right now and how you approached and handled this situation. So I will put the link below so you can go watch that old conversation. But when I tell you not more than, I don't know, a week or two later, here we go with all of this huge, blow up in the news about what's going on at CBS and 60 Minutes and how Scott Pelley, the long term veteran journalist who's been around for decades, when he shows you how to burn some bridges and do it like spectacularly. And so I want to talk about that and why it's different from the first situation where I was like, let's be a little more cautious. This one's going to be talking about like how this, not how it came to be, but why it matters and how, in this case, dare I say, it's justifiable and it can work. Whereas for everybody couldn't do this, right? Everybody couldn't do this. So here's the quick background. The quick background is, if you're anywhere watching the news or keeping up what's going on in the world, hello, in the U.S., there's all this mess going on with media, with the media companies, with legacy media, and particularly with CBS and all the politics behind it. Well, so fast forward to um, several of the key staff, journalists, executive producer, a couple other folks from CBS 60 Minutes, the legacy show that's been around for decades and well respected news magazine, they fired these folks, like unceremoniously fired them. And then brought in as an executive producer a new person who has no background in broadcast journalism, has a background in documentary work, yes, but not in terms of broadcast journalism. And I'm like, just literally like no experience in running a show like this, all of these things. And here he comes. So apparently on the day when he's like getting introduced to the staff, and all this happens within days of each other, right? So the major firings happening, like I think on a Wednesday, Thursday, and the new guy comes in, and then there's a meeting with the full staff on a Monday, and Scott Pelley, who was, I believe, the senior person, if or close to it, in the room, just kind of let it all hang out. Apparently, just kind of said, I know everyone else can't speak up about this, but I'm going to, and express his concerns about how things were being handled, about how the other folks were let go, and all of these things. And this is in a room full of staff who, many of them would not have been able to share at that level because they didn't have the longevity. And that's going to be the thing that I zone in here is Scott Pelley had a 37-year career at CBS. So not beyond whatever he did for a few years before that. The man literally has been there for 37 years. And there is something to be said for longevity in place and being able to have the freedom to be a little more expressive, a little more open, and to speak up, hello, empowering moment, when others might not be able to because, they're like, I got to pay my kids' tuition. I got to, keep a mortgage, and all of these things, where someone with his longevity, he's been through all of that stuff. He's been through some things, and he's like, you know what, I'm on the back end of this. I'm going to use some of the weight that I have to say some things and to do some things. So that's what happened. It was not well received, of course, by the management. And so allegedly, the story goes that they try to pull him in privately to have a conversation. The words that, what Scott Pelley put out there was like, I already had my resignation letter ready. They didn't ask for his resignation in that meeting, but there was supposed to be a conversation about how we could move forward. It was decided that they couldn't. And then the next day, this is the part that kills me personally, having been in some senior management positions where, tough hiring and firing decisions have to be made, is instead of letting the 37-year employee get out gracefully and say, you know what, we don't have a meeting of the minds and he's going to be moving on, accept his resignation or whatever. They did not do that. Instead, they publicly announced that they were firing him for cause. And it's because of how he handled himself in that Monday meeting, saying he was insubordinate, and 37 years in a position, like, it's just laughable to me. Because is it possible? Technically, sure. And are we really doing that? So yes, that's what they did. They fired him for cause, made a public announcement about it, and then proceeded to tear him down and say he behaved this way, blah 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 blah, right? Which of course leaves him open to be able to say exactly what he thinks and feels, because they just laid him out. They just laid him out. And so he's been making the rounds, having some conversations and saying some things and being very vocal and very, very open. I anticipate a lawsuit coming, not because he's trying to keep his job and to go back, but because of how it was handled. I could totally see that coming, but that's a whole different conversation. We're not discussing legal issues. Yes. That said, here's the thing I brought up in the previous video: 4 things that will be like, here are my break points when it comes to breaking relationships and, saying, you know what, this is not going to work anymore, and burning that bridge, especially professionally. And it's an issues of integrity, when there's trust issues, um, when there's actions that bring harm, and or just like, there's a different direction. And when I tell you, when I look at this, I see all 4 of these in one. That's why I said, like, this was massive, because they hit all of them in one scenario. And Scott Pelley said, here we go. First of all, the matter of an integrity, not just bringing his reputation into question by the way in which they fired him, but even before that, for him, he's like, I'm watching these things happen, and there's a lot of things that were not right or that did not jive and were not done in integrity. And he's like, I can't hang with that anymore. Like, I have to go ahead and be like more vocal about why I'm going to be stepping away, or while I'm okay with stepping away, right? So that's that matter of integrity. When something does not jive with your values of what's right and wrong, and all of that, like, sometimes that's when it is worth burning that bridge, especially if it causes your personal reputation to be brought into question, right? And that's something I've said before. I do not play with my personal reputation. I worked long and hard in my chosen field to get to where I have been and am and going, and I'm not allowing that to happen. So totally see that. The second point was when trust has been damaged. When I tell you, when they started firing his colleagues off the cuff for no reason other than the pseudo political ones, no, actual political ones that are going unstated, they're being stated as pseudo shifts in direction or whatever. That trust is broken, not just with Scott Pelley. He just vocalized it, but they broke that trust with their entire staff. How is that staffed? Is there like, if you are going to just fire outright these leaders in the industry on one of the most notable broadcast uh, creations, eh, in U.S. history, who are we, right? So that trust being broken is a huge one. Scott called it for what it was, and he was like, "Yeah, I can't do that. Like, I can't trust you. You can't expect me to trust you moving forward when you've asked me to do things that go against my journalistic um, beliefs, credibility, all of that." And he talks about that. That was some of the things leading up to it that no one really knew about before until now. And as well as how you're treating your people. Like, and this is a whole other conversation about what leadership is really about when you are leaning in to protect your people and honor their trust, and how this management team is not doing it. But here is Scott as a senior journalist, as a senior professional, maintaining that trust on their behalf. That's a whole other conversation I didn't necessarily even plan on getting into here today, and I'm not going to, but that may have to be followed up on. Okay. And then the third one about actions that bring harm. I just talked about that. Firing people for apparently no reason that brings harm, not just to them, but also to the folks who are left behind. Because again, there's a level of uncertainty. There are questions about where are we going, what are we doing, and it's irreparable. Like, you can't pull that back. Those actions have been taken. And Scott named it and called it out and was like, I can't operate in this environment. And mind you, he's been around for almost 40 years. He's been through things. This is not like this is the first quote upset that he's been through. But this one, where it magnifies in such a way as this, is, truly been acknowledged as being over and above what anybody could, expect or anticipate. And then the last thing, that whole different direction, which that's enough to cause a minor break. You could still maintain a relationship if you're like, you know what, they're moving in a different direction. I'm not for that. I'm not with that. So let me move on over here. But it was just done in such a magnificent way that this direction is harmful. It's damaging people's reputation. It's damaging trust. Like, it just all comes together and culminates in this huge, hey, let me set this bridge on fire because I am absolutely not coming back over it professionally. And the reason why it works for him is because, I dare say, um, the longevity of his uh, being in his profession, right? People outside of that trust and believe in him, and he's carried himself in such a way that no one's blaming him for doing it or questioning his judgment for taking these actions. Whereas if he had less time, if, again, being male and white plays into this as well, even though even I will say not as much, because this one is just so magnificent. It's just crazy, right? But there are women who may not, who could have some years behind them as well, but not be able to necessarily do this, right? Or people of color. So there are some other factors that do play into this. I do believe. However, I think that because the situation is so, like, crazy big, like, they get minimized because there's so much else, so much more going on with this, that it's a lesson for anyone in your profession, in your career, when you're looking at making changes or needing to get away from something and questioning whether you even want to maintain a relationship with that person or that entity. When it may be, there comes a time when you have to question it, or when you say, you know what, I'm just going to slide on out here quietly, versus I got to go out in a big way because there are other people involved. There are other things involved that give weight to it. And I think that's what's happening here with Scott Pelley. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about burning some professional bridges in a big way, like he did it. But again, in my light, with those things and situations that I've identified previously, he did it with all of the things because they all came into play in this situation. And so I want you to seriously, though, think about that. You know, when you are willing to walk away, like what is it you're willing to give up when you're ready to walk away from a relationship, a professional one, when you're ready to do something different and you really don't want to have anything to do with the people you dealt with before, like what is that going to look like? And being honest with yourself with what you're willing to give up or what the consequences may be of that action. And are you absolutely positive you're willing to move forward with that? And I will say here, Scott Pelley was like, I'm good. I'm good. And as a matter of fact, I'm gonna be even more vocal since you fired me unceremoniously for cause as well. So I'll be keeping up with this. There might be, there might be a Burning Bridges part 3, but we'll just see how this goes because I think it's absolutely fascinating and it definitely is a masterclass lesson in watching how you not just have built relationships over the years, but when those relationships shift and how they shift and how you respond to them. All right. I'd love to get your feedback on it. Leave me some comments down below, and we will see you in the next video.